spending plan with more to come. This is really unbelievable. So Carney has tabled a $486 billion spending plan. Remember last week he told us that we weren't going to get a budget. His finance minister said we weren't going to get a budget. They got so much pushback, they decided to table a spending plan. And so I'll read a little bit from Global News. The Carney government presented Parliament Tuesday with a plan to spend about the same amount of money in the fiscal year ahead as the Trudeau government did in its final year, but $486 billion. Spending plan is almost certain to change when it's updated in the fall, when it's likely to include nearly $24 billion in spending commitments for this year that the Liberals promised during the election campaign. There was no evidence that the spending plan tabled Tuesday contained, for example, $3.5 billion that campaigning Liberals said they would spend this year on trade diversification corridors fund. During the campaign, the Liberals promised to boost CBC's funding by $150 million, but in the tabled plan, CBC's budget was up just $42 million, so presumably there's more to come. Your colleague, Chris, over at the CTF, Franco Terrazino, said that the federal spending in the main estimate nearly doubled in just 10 years. So in 2016, when Justin Trudeau had initially promised that he would just run modest deficits of $10 billion before getting back to balance, back then it was only $250 billion that we're spending. We're now spending $487 billion. He says, somebody take away the credit card. So what do you make of all this, Chris?
It's really astonishing. And I don't want to blackpill people here, because I know that, things have been a little rough the last few weeks when they're trying to figure out what to fight next and how to, aim for something that's positive. But I gotta say, this amount of money, like 400 something billion dollars, our national debt is like 1.2, 1.3 trillion dollars. So that amount of billions is $500 billion in spending. It is mind-blowing amount of money. And what really gets me is that, I don't have very thick rose-colored glasses anymore. I've been in the game too long. I'm very skeptical of all forms of government. But when they announced that Mark Carney was the front runner of the Liberals for leadership, this little teeny tiny spark in me thought, well, at least he understands fiscal policy or
Right.
monetary policy, right? The central banker should know how to math the math. But no, the central banker is gonna be worse with money than the drama teacher. I actually became more disillusioned then. So I'm just hoping that because they're at a minority and because we can't spend more money, we can't tax people more, you can't get blood out of a stone, that there will be enough Canadians that speak up against these MPs, including those Liberal MPs, that there'll be enough pressure put on Carney, that some form of common sense deep down inside of him will say, you know what, I'm going to take the Paul Martin route of being a Liberal Prime Minister or a Liberal Finance Minister. I'm going to take that route and we're going to start cutting back on spending. So I'm really encouraging people just to continue to be in the fight, keep being vocal, because that's all we got right now.
Well, it's so true. So many people, I think even centrists and blue liberals call them, believe that Mark Carney was a big enough change from Justin Trudeau, and that was good enough to satiate the need for change in the country, partially for what you just described. Like, he's a central banker. He should be able to run the country fiscally and responsibly. And you would think that would be he'd want that to be his legacy, that his legacy would be he came in, Canada was in big trouble, and he steered the ship and got us out of it. But yet, from this plan, it seems like, his strategy is really to just double down and do the same thing, which I think is cause for huge concern. I want to talk about the consultant spending increases. So here we have the Conservative Shadow Minister of Finance saying this on X, saying that Liberal consulting under Mark Carney has surged to $26 billion, up from Trudeau's already bloated $19 billion. Carney says spending is focused on investing for Canadians. But is this seriously calling billions in consulting fees an investment? This is something I don't understand, right? Because with Justin Trudeau, it's like he grew the size of government, he increased the number of bureaucrats, and then simultaneously he also started using consultants, which makes no sense to me, right? Like, why do we need consultants in government when we have the bureaucrats? And as much as we may criticize bureaucrats in Canada, it's like, they're earnest people. They show up to do a hard day's work day in and day out. They're committed to their job. They get paid modestly. It's not like they're living high lives and getting rich necessarily. Whereas a consultant, I don't know what kind of fees they're charging, and it just seems like an exorbitant expense, $26 billion in consulting when we already have a very large civil service in Canada. Like, make it make sense to me, Chris.
I will try. So first off, on the bureaucrats, they actually do get paid quite a bit. The average bureaucrat salary now is about $125,000 per year. I was surprised by that too. I was assuming it would be just under 100 or so because there's going to be like lower level, paperworky type people, and then all the way up to like super specialized like finance people that can think in 4D math who put together budgets. But no, the average now is over 125,000. But on your point of transparency and accountability, like you're bang on. Like it is unbelievable that they are contracting out work after they have increased the size of the bureaucracy by 99,000 people. Franco just put out a news release today, and I made a little joke about it, but I'm Gen X, so he didn't get it. I said, oh, it's 99 red Luftballons, right? It's 99,000 more bureaucrats added since 2015, since former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau won that election. That's like 100,000 people. You're basically taking the population of Red Deer, Alberta, and plunking them in to the bureaucrat desks. But on top of that, Candace, exactly what you're saying, they're contracting out apart from that. So people who you can't FOIP, okay? You can't get the documents that you would otherwise want to get. So say there's some big fancy stupid spending project that they're doing. Say it's something like the ArriveCan app, okay? When they contract that out to a private company or a consultant firm or whatever, and they don't do it in-house, it is much harder to get information for taxpayers because they can try to squish around the rules and say, oh, well, it's a client or privileged information because we can't give away competitive edge, as if there's like competitive edge for government lobbyists and government consultants that ring around the center of power in a capital city like Ottawa. Same thing happens in DC. So this is to your point exactly. This is unaccountable. It's lacking in transparency, and it's a huge waste of money. If we're hiring hand over fist extra bureaucrats for the past 10 years, get them to do the job. Why are you contracting out? Unfortunately, we know the reason why. Quite often because power corrupts, they'll hand out these contracts to their friends and associates, and it's all on the taxpayer dime.
Well, it really doesn't make sense. Like, I'm trying to even think of like an example of like what is it that they use these consultants for? Do you have any ideas? Like, you have a bureaucracy, they're trained, they're specialized, they do the job in and out, day in and day out. Like, in what scenario do you need to bring in, a fancy consulting firm to come in? It just doesn't make sense to have that. And like I said, it was 19 billion with a B under Justin Trudeau, and now it's 26 billion. Is this just like helping out their liberal friends, like the liberal campaign? I mean, do you have any idea of like what kind of consulting they're doing?
Great question. So I'll just give you an example from, my own field and your own field. They can hire out, for example, comms consultants and media consultants, right? So they'll get somebody in there to do quote unquote media training or crisis communication training, and they could contract something like that out. I'm just using an example. And so if they could say, teach the prime minister or teach the finance minister how to conduct a better interview. Okay, guys, people who are a director of communications, you're already supposed to be an expert in communications. That's literally why you have your job. You also have subordinates or folks who work with you who are colleagues, like press secretaries and stuff, who are typically more junior, okay, who are coming up through the ranks, but are still good, solid communicators. They've worked in media, they've worked on, advocacy organizations, things like that. They've worked both sides of the fence, so to speak. They should be good enough to train up this stuff. Apart from really rare instances, say God forbid there was a disaster or something really bad had happened and it was on the government and they really needed to figure out what had happened, then you can understand why they'd call in, say, an investigator, right? Or a crisis communications expert. Those are super rare instances. Why are we spending more than $1 billion on consultants? Again, this is what happens. It happens red team, blue team. This is an issue of power, okay? And lack of accountability and transparency. This is what happens when you have this big pot of taxpayers' money, next to no oversight, and you start handing out contracts and you start getting favors. This is a bad thing for taxpayers.
It's unbelievable. I mean, I know that there's not a lot of people who are cheering for Donald Trump north of the border anymore. But one of the things he did, at least, was bring in an outsider, Elon Musk, to like
Yeah.
forensically look at government and look at the low hanging fruit and try to cut it. This seems like the lowest hanging fruit possible. $26 billion on consulting. Well, I want to move on over to Pierre Poilievre. So yesterday, Poilievre released a video saying that Mark Carney's spending is even worse than Trudeau's, despite the Liberals convincing Canadians that they were no longer the party of reckless spenders. Let's play that clip.
Liberals are masters of symbolism. See, in the recent election, to convince people that they were no longer the party of reckless spenders, they abruptly replaced a leader who looked like a reckless teenage trust fund baby with a stern-looking banker. And to be fair, Mr. Carney's spending is not as bad as Trudeau's. It's worse. And Mark Carney was elected to bring those costs down. And in the first year after taking office, the year when you would expect him to take action against those out-of-control costs, he actually increased them by 8%. In fact, the spending will grow almost 3 times faster than the combined rate of inflation and population growth. It is a $500 billion spending bill with no budget.
Unbelievable. Poilievre hits the nail right on the head there. And then earlier today, Poilievre spoke to reporters. He told them, I think this is the obvious, but this is the right thing, that the Conservatives will not vote for this Liberal government spending plan. Let's play that clip.
It's clear that Mark Carney is even more expensive than Justin Trudeau. This $500 billion spending bill will drive up inflation, interest rates, above and beyond what they would otherwise be. And that is why I'm announcing today that Conservatives will vote against this $500 billion of inflationary, irresponsible, out-of-control Liberal spending.
What do you make of Poilievre's response there?
Well, he's absolutely right. Like we were saying at the top of the show, this is irresponsible. I have to stress this. 50% of Canadians, half of our population, is within $200 of insolvency every month. Meaning they're within $200 of not being able to make the minimum payments on their bills. That's not paying off your credit card. That's not paying off your line of credit. That is making the minimum payment on your bills so that the repo man doesn't show up in your driveway. Half of Canadians are in that boat right now. And a huge reason why are twofold. The crazy carbon taxes that they nailed us with for 10 years and then conveniently got rid of just before the election. Still happy to see those ones kind of gone right now. But 2, to Pierre Poilievre's point, inflation. The inflation crisis was caused by this government's money printing and how crazy they went during the lockdowns. If you do those two things at the same time, you lock up businesses, you say you can't, have production anymore, you halt the means of production, and you print a whole bunch of money, that is an inflationary storm. That is why when we're looking around and we're looking at the prices of stuff now, we're going, holy smokes, right? So he's bang on there. I will also point out that he's correct in taking this government to task for its overspending, because that is not what they campaigned on. The language they were talking about was being more fiscally prudent. That the era of that guy in the sneakers who's showing up, the running shoes in the Senate chamber, like he did during the King's speech, that's over. We're down to the adults being back in the room now. You can put over that persona, because Prime Minister Mark Carney certainly wasn't wearing running shoes to listen to the King. But then you can also, with the numbers, make that match your persona. Why don't they rein in spending? Why don't they have their finances match the image that they're trying to put forward here with Carney? And again, I'm pleading with him because he's not a constant seasoned politician. So maybe he's not as cynical. Maybe we can appeal, to his own better judgment, because he was the Bank of Canada governor under Harper. He was there with the late Jim Flaherty. So he does have that teeth cutting. He does have those bones in there somewhere. So let's hope that he kind of sobers up and realizes, hey, wait a minute, I'm the smart one in the room. All you goofballs here in the cabinet minister, you've been screwing it up for the past 10 years. I'm going to go my own way and make more fiscally responsible decisions. I will also point out that Pierre Poilievre has my books. That's nice to see. That's the Alberta. It's basically
Nice.
the History of Alberta set book that was put forward by the Byfeld family and the Western Standard Alberta Report kids.
Wow. Well, I'm glad to hear that he's reading your book, and yeah, hopefully they can have a positive impact influence on Carney because I mean, during the election campaign, he did run basically as a conservative.
He
Like he
did.
took a whole bunch of platform pieces from the conservative tidbits. So I'm actually genuinely surprised to see this sort of reckless Trudeau-esque budget, and hopefully your advocacy over there at CTF can knock some sense into. Okay, we're going to go from bad to worse when it comes to members of parliament and political parties over to the Green Party. Elizabeth May really outdoing herself with this one. She calls for the recognition of gay genocide. According to this petition that Elizabeth May has sponsored, it claims that Canada is committing to SLGBTQIA plus genocide. Okay, the petition accusing accusing Canada of carrying out a genocide against the country's. I'm just going to say gay because I don't want to read out that acronym again, but you know what I mean. The country's gay community has received support of the Green Party leader despite backing the petition. Elizabeth May said that. She did not actually mention it upon her return. This is according to Blacklock's reporter. So I didn't understand what they were talking about. So I went and I looked at the actual petition itself. Here it is on our Commons website, petition E6497. It says currently the human rights of Canadian gay community are endangered by any Canadian organization and political party. We, the undersigned residents of Canada, call upon the government to declare the removal of Canadian federal rights and freedoms of the gay target group to be considered a form of genocide as a practice diminishes the community of people and therefore should be declared illegal by anyone attempting to do so and to ensure that their human rights. So if I get this right, they say that their rights and freedoms are being targeted and that is a form of genocide. I don't even know if they have examples. I don't understand what this means, but for some reason Elizabeth May has decided to sponsor this petition. So I'm wondering, Chris, what do you make of it?
Okay, so I've been a staffer on the Hill. I've been a parliamentary journalist with mainstream media too on the Hill. I will say that members of parliament can choose which petitions they wish to read aloud, no matter what the topic is. It comes from their constituents. Okay, so the area wherever just elected her would have then some people or groups of people would have hopefully gotten enough signatures, and then the member of parliament, as their representative, can choose to read it aloud or not. I will also point out that genocide is like big time illegal. Like that's way up there in the list of things that is already very, very illegal in Canada. And I'm not trying to be goofy about this. Like sometimes people don't know the terminology and stuff. That's right up there. It's similar. It reminds me of Bill C-63 in a way, because Bill C-63 is the one where it's often called the Online Harms Act, which we're expecting them to reintroduce as it had fully been in the last parliament. It's called the Online Harms Bill because it purports to protect children online, which any decent person wants to do. Okay? And the issue here is that things like, God forbid, sharing images of child abuse or doing something heinous like advocating terrorism online, those are already against the law.
Right.
They're right up there in the criminal code. They take super heavy penalties for imprisonment. If you want to increase the sentencing for stuff like that, take it to justice. Why do they have it in heritage? And so that's where, when we have wording like this, again, people are free to write whatever the petition they want to write. That is part of free expression. But I just would urge people to get to know what the laws already are and really focus their language if they want to be effective when it comes to things like petitions, because the wording of that one was kind of all over the place.
Well, yeah, I was reading it and I'm like, this doesn't really even make sense, right?
No.
I don't know that the people understand the meaning of the word genocide. Like, genocide was a word that was created for the Holocaust, after the Holocaust, because it was so heinous and disgusting what had taken place that they needed a new word that was stronger than like any other word that they already had. And so the idea is that it's like when like there's like an orchestrated attempt to kill an entire race of people, right? And so like it doesn't make sense in this context. There's no example of really what they're even talking about. I see on here that it only has 296 signatures. So it's just like wacky Elizabeth May out there grabbing a petition that she had no business grabbing. And then of course like our friends over at the Rebel News reported it and just made her look really stupid and bad, as she deserved to, for promoting something like this. Like, as a member of parliament, you use your position of power, to highlight important issues, right? And to make important political statements like we saw Andrew Lawton doing at the top. And then you kind of juxtapose that with the crazy lady pretending that, because, every time they throw this word around, set aside, it kind of like diminishes the actual thing that it is, which is a horrible thing. It's only happened like a handful of times in history, well, at least in modern history. And so this idea that like, okay, because you don't think that your rights are being fulfilled in some way, I don't even really understand how, that's genocide is just totally absurd. Last word to you.
I would strongly recommend, and I mean this earnestly, if you're coming at this from a left-wing perspective and you want to stop like logging or whatever it is, honestly, be very precise in your language. Be exacting in your language. Less is more. Be very clear. A is A. A thing is itself. Okay? Read Politics in the English Language by George Orwell. Read some of the shorter books written by the late Prime Minister Winston Churchill, okay? Who can take really complex issues that are charged with emotionalism sometimes down into very simple words that people are able to understand and that governments can then also act upon. So just some free communications advice. Be very exact with the language you're choosing and with the meaning of your words. I will also point out that members of parliament, including Ms. May, are now paid well over $200,000 per year. Tons of their expenses are covered, things like food. So if they're in the House of Commons during the week, a lot of people don't know this. They have 3 hot meals provided to them per day that are all fancy catered. Okay, they're just behind the curtains there in the lobbies. They can write off a ton of their expenses. In the case of Ms. May, when eventually she no longer is elected or chooses to retire, she's going to be in line for a huge pension because she's been in the House of Commons for a long time now. Keep this in mind. No matter what your MP is doing, the next time you see them doing something that you disagree with, that they're making well over 200K plus a lot of plush benefits.
Well, such a nice lifestyle. And I totally agree. I used to always have our interns and new staff read Politics in the English Language. One of the best parts of that is specifically about the word fascism. It says that fascism has no meaning. It's just something that people don't like, and there's no like people throw it around without even really understanding what it means. That's 100% true. And some sage advice there from Chris Sims. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Keep up the good work over there at the Taxpayers.
Thanks so much.
All right, folks, have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back again on Monday. I'm Candace Malcolm. This is the Candace Malcolm Show. Thank you, and God bless.